Matt Walsh joins us now, a columnist with The Blaze. He's here to talk about his new book, The Unholy Trinity, Blocking the Left's Assault on Life, Marriage, and Gender. Matt Walsh, explain what constitutes the Unholy Trinity.
Well, this book focuses on the three the three primary battlegrounds of the culture war. That's life, marriage, and gender. And the left has waged its assault, its kind of three-pronged assault, to redefine human life, then marriage, then gender. So that's sort of the unholy trinity, that three-pronged assault on the culture that, in my estimation, is what conservatives and Christians and anyone who's not a far-left radical should be focused on.
Why'd you write the book?
Because, for one thing, to explain these concepts, to battle against the left's war to redefine these kind of pillars of human civilization. But I also wanted to speak to conservatives and Christians and kind of galvanize them and unite them around these issues. Because I think what you find on the left, they're very united. There's a united front. They understand why these issues are so important, even if they're wrong about all of them. But on the right, it seems like if you got 100 conservatives in a room and you ask them what are the most important issues, what are our fundamental principles, you would probably get 75 different answers. And so that's why I wrote this book primarily, was for conservatives and Christians to be united around these issues.
Abortion is the issue, you say, that sets the stage for everything else in this book. Explain.
Because abortion is, first of all, we started with abortion about 40 years ago, of course. And this was the first assault where we redefined human life. And once you've redefined human life and you've made life itself relative, because that's what is leftism? Leftism is the rejection of objective truth, of God. And it is the kind of instituting relativism as the guiding principle of our culture, where everything is relative to me. So I have my own truth, my reality, what's good for me is good for me. And so it makes sense that we begin by making life itself relative, which is what the left has done. When you talk to a liberal, it's not that they'll say usually that the unborn child is not a child all the time. It's more they say it's not a child if the mother doesn't want it to be a child. So life itself is relative to how convenient that life is to those around it. And once you've begun there, once the left succeeded in that area, that was an enormous amount of power. And from that kind of foundation, they were able to wage the rest of their campaign.
You think the left has succeeded here?
Well, they've certainly succeeded legally. They've succeeded culturally in the sense that, a large preponderance of our culture obviously are either in favor of abortion or they don't see it as that big of a deal. And I don't have the statistics in front of me, but if you were to, how many people in our culture are, number one, against the killing of the unborn, and number two, see it as a really big deal, which it is. You would think if you do think it's killing the unborn, you would consider it a pretty big deal. But I think that's a relatively small number of people. So I think the left has largely been successful, but not permanently successful.
Phone numbers, if you want to join this conversation with Matt Walsh, the author of The Unholy Trinity. Republicans, it's 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. Independents, 202-748-8002 is your number as folks are calling in. You don't like the term traditional marriage. Why?
Because traditional puts a qualifier on it. It makes it sound like there are other forms of legitimate marriage, which there aren't. So, I don't like traditional marriage for the same reason I wouldn't refer to a traditional rectangle. A rectangle is a rectangle. A circle is not a non-traditional rectangle. It's just not a rectangle. And so with marriage, there is one form of marriage. That marriage has a certain function, has certain dimensions, it has a certain purpose. It does certain things. It has a certain potential, has certain responsibilities that are on it. And the union between same-sex couples, whatever you call it, it's not the same thing because it does not have the same dimensions. It doesn't have the same function. Doesn't have the same purpose. Doesn't have the same potential. So before we even get into assigning moral designations or saying it's immoral or whatever, before we get into that, we must agree that it's not the same thing. It is a different thing.
One part of what you just said, it doesn't have the same potential. What do you mean by that?
It doesn't have life-giving potential. There is never going to be a scenario where two men can create a baby. And in principle, the union between a man and a woman creates a child. Now, I know that then the response is, I'm sure people will call in and say, well, what about an infertile couple? What about a couple that, has sterile for whatever reason? Well, that's, those are physical defects. That's not, we're talking in principle here. So that's a physical defect, that's an aberration. That doesn't change the principle.
Let's let you talk with some of the callers. Sally's up first, Hyattsville, Maryland. Line for Democrats. Sally, good morning.
Good morning. I would like to ask your guest how he can talk about the topics that he is using and his views and reconcile this with Christianity. There is something about Christianity, and I am a Christian, and I am a lesbian, and I am black, and I am, believe it or not, pro-choice. But I'm also a Christian. I believe in God. I believe in loving others, and I'm believing in helping others. And I don't see any Christian trait in his comment. That's all I have to say.
Matt Walsh, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, you say that you're a Christian, yet you're in favor, you think it's okay for God's children in the womb to be killed. Can you explain that? She's not here.
No.
She's gone. Oh, okay. That's the see. What you find a lot of times on the left is they'll come in with some broad statement like that, and then they leave. It's just fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me that anyone could claim to be a Christian while not only being in favor of killing human beings, of killing innocent children, but even to say that you must be in favor of that to be a Christian, because that's what we just heard from the caller. Not just that it's okay, but that you must be. In Jeremiah it says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So how do you reconcile that with the idea that a child could just be killed and tossed aside? I would also ask you, as a Christian, how do you reconcile the fact that Jesus Christ, according to our faith, Jesus Christ came into the world through the womb? Jesus Christ was an unborn child. That's how he entered the world. So how can you say that an unborn child is not human or is garbage that can be tossed aside while Jesus Christ not only created this child, but shared in the same experience, was once the same thing as the unborn child? I just don't see how you can reconcile that. I think it's crazy.
Do you want folks on the left to read your book?
Yes, I do.
Do you think a sentence like this turns them off? The first sentence of the book, the first liberal was named Lucifer.
Yeah. Well, if the truth turns them off, there's nothing I can do about that. If somebody is so deluded, like our last caller, who believes that Christians have an obligation to be in favor of killing children, then as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing I can do with somebody like that other than just tell them the truth. It's hard for me to dance around that. It's hard for me to find a gentle way of telling that person, for instance, that they're completely wrong about everything they think and what they think is heretical and frankly disgusting.
Dennis is in West Palm Beach, Florida, a Republican. Dennis, good morning.
First of all, I want to thank C-SPAN for the prior show and this one also. No one else on TV would have it. I really appreciate it. I hope I don't use all my time up with this, but picking up on what Matt was just saying to the caller that identified herself as a Christian, the bottom line is John the Baptist recognized Jesus in the womb of the Blessed Mother before she was ever born. He leapt in the womb, is what the Bible says, when he came near Jesus. And in the Bible, it also says, God says, I knew you when you were in your mother's womb, or words to that effect. I'm not a Bible expert. But what I really want to get from that is, what impact does he think public schools have on teaching our children how to view what I'll call the culture of life issues as opposed to the culture of death? I believe the public schools teach them to accept the culture of death. How do the public schools teach them they should view marriage? And how do the public schools teach our kids they should view gender? I really think that we've got to have parental choice in the education of our children. There was a Supreme Court case in 1925, Pierce versus Society of Sisters. And the bottom line is, when they decided that case, the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in favor of the nuns, who said all children in Oregon do not have to go to a public school. And in the Supreme Court decision, one of the key sentences was where the judges ruled 9-0 that children are not creatures of the state, that the parents have the right to do what they want. But in Florida, where I am, just as an example, the law says all you kids have to go to school. Well, that's fine. You pay all your life for that. You don't get to choose the school your kids go to unless you're wealthy and you can pay for the public schools all your life and then pay again to send your kids to Catholic schools or whatever.
Dennis, got your point. Matt Walsh.
Yeah, I think, I take it might not surprise anyone that I take a very dim view of the public school system. And, and I know it's very difficult because as a society, we've sort of become dependent on the public school system, which has a lot to do, well, it has to do with the economy. A lot of people, you have two parents in the home, they both have to work jobs. It also has to do with the collapse of the nuclear family, where a lot of people are dependent on the public school essentially to parent their kids. But I think we really, especially my kids are almost 4. My oldest kids are almost 4. So they're not yet in, we haven't made these decisions yet finally about where we're going to send them from school. But young parents like myself, I think, need to strongly consider just abandoning the public school system entirely. And I agree with you that obviously we need to have choice and we need to do what we can to open up these options to other people, because the public school system is completely hostile, not just to, let me make it clear, they're not just hostile to Christian values, which of course they are, but hostile to the truth, to science even. I had a reader recently send me a middle school newspaper article from a middle school in Virginia, which was outlining all the new genders. And there are 52 genders or whatever they say these days. And this is a middle school, and one of the genders that they described, and this was again for kids 10 to 13, is called gender flux, which means that you could be partially one gender, partially another, partially a moose or something. And this is what they're teaching in schools. I mean, there's no science to this at all. There's no truth to it. And I don't know. We put our kids into that system for 12 years, and I don't see how they come out with their heads still screwed on straight.
Let's go to Chicago, Illinois. Albert, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Jesus commanded his disciples, his followers, to do 2 things: to love one another and to go out and preach the gospel in love. The gospel being the message of his birth, death, and resurrection. He didn't command anybody to go out and to try to interfere and infringe upon people's God-given free will, which you all seem to enjoy doing. Now, there are Christians all over the world that are being persecuted to the point of death for actually spreading that message of his birth, death, and resurrection. While you all spend your time claiming to be persecuted and suffering loss of your religious liberties because there's pushback against you all trying to butt into other people's lives and take away their God-given free will. Jesus didn't command you all to butt into people's personal lives and try to take away their God-given free will. He said to go out and spread the message of his birth, death, and resurrection.
Got your point, Albert. Matt Walsh.
I don't know exactly what specifically he was referring to, or in what way I've taken away anyone's free will. It's not possible to take anyone's free will from them. That's why it's God-given. I certainly can't do it by having opinions. This is something, again, you find on the left, where they are so opposed to anyone having a different point of view that they'll claim that just in having a different point of view, you've removed from them the right to disagree with you, which isn't how it works. I'm not a congressman. I haven't made a law saying that you're not allowed to be wrong about this. But let's just, because we've talked about, we've seemed to mainly talk about abortion. I can only assume he was partially referring to that. So in what way do we respect the quote-unquote God-given free will of an individual by killing them in the womb?
Albert's still there. Do you want to respond, Albert?
Albert, how do we respect someone's God-given free will by killing them in the womb? Are you in favor of that?
Go ahead. We've lost Albert.
Okay. Look, I don't blame these callers because, especially from a Christian perspective, it is impossible to actually defend the notion that Christ wants us to kill our babies. It's impossible to do, so all they can do is just kind of throw out the slogans and the talking points and then run away. But I am all about respecting God-given rights. That's what I'm talking about. And our Declaration of Independence kind of sets the stage by talking about what are our God-given rights fundamentally. And we begin with, we have the right to life. So if you don't have the right to life, if you can't begin by actually being born and having your life respected, I don't know how you get to any of these other rights. So we have to start with that, and then we can move on to these other rights.
Let's Go to our line for Independence, Jackson, Missouri. Patty is waiting. Patty, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, C-SPAN, for your program. I had 2 points to make to Mr. Walsh. The first one is how our society handles its most vulnerable, such as the unborn, tells a lot about itself. And I think we used to be a great society, and then, of course, now it's perfectly legal to just kill anything that you don't happen to want. And then the second point was that I feel like a lot of the liberal, they scream, they shout, they pound sand down our throats so that they can validate their own opinions, their own, sense points of view. So I don't know, I'm not allowed to have a point of view or maybe my own opinion or my own rights simply because it makes them feel uncomfortable because I'm different. Therefore, they have to pound it down my way so that they can feel better about themselves. But those are just my 2 thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And going back to your first point, because I think it's very important, how do you judge a society, the greatness of a society, the charity of a society? How do you really judge that? And I agree with you that you look at how do they treat their absolute most vulnerable citizens. Because it's easy, if somebody is able-bodied and they're out there and they're working and they're paying taxes, it's easy to respect them, but our children need us to take care of them. And so if we are refusing to do that, not just refusing to do it, but saying we won't even treat you like people, and not only will we not treat you like people, but we can kill you and then sell you for parts at Planned Parenthood. When a society is saying that, then it's hard for me to believe that this is, this is anything but a very sick and, frankly, wicked society.
Bill King wants you to comment on the segment of people that believe if a woman is pregnant due to rape, that she should be forced to give birth.
Well, obviously that you're going right to the difficult cases. And let's first establish that 97 or more % of abortions have nothing to do with rape or incest. But if we've established, look, there's only one reason to be against abortion, and that's that the unborn child is a human being and a person, and you're not allowed to kill innocent people. That's the only reason to be against it. If that's not the case, then abortion is okay in every circumstance. If that is the case, then abortion is never okay, even in the really difficult situations. And what I would say in the terrible situation where a woman is raped and conceives a child, punish the rapist, put the rapist in jail, life in prison. I'm fine with that. But to execute the child for the sins of the father, I think, is a grave, grave injustice.
James is in Jessup, Georgia, a Republican. James, good morning.
Good morning. I'm a little confused here. That seemed to be a generalization about left versus right when it comes to God. If God is a spirit, then how do he dissect himself from left versus right? Generalization term, when you have these type of partners on, always seem to be, I like to know who he funded by. And do he have the Holy Ghost? Or do he believe in the Holy Ghost? Or is the Holy Ghost detrimental to his accusation that he's making this morning about people in general, left versus right, as to assume all people that's Republican is so Holy Ghost filled and all people that's left is all devil filled.
Got your point, James.
Well, yeah, I certainly don't think that all Republicans are, filled with the Holy Spirit and are warriors for truth or anything like that. In fact, I began by saying that when you look at the Republican Party or conservatives in general, there is not a consensus on these issues. And a great many of them would agree with the left.
One quote from your book: the lack of resistance from the conservative and Christians may have been most immediately responsible for our current situation as it pertains to marriage. The lack of resistance, the eagerness with which many Christians ceded marriage to the homosexual lobby has its roots in many deadly trends that infiltrated the church in the West long ago.
Yeah, I'm all about taking the responsibility back on ourselves. And as Christians, we could talk about how the culture is so against us, and it is, and so hostile to us. And all that is true, but how did we get to this point? And I think we have to look at ourselves. Because even now, 70% of the country is supposedly Christian. I think would call themselves Christian. But if 70% of the country if they were really on fire with the faith and they really cared about their faith and they stood for the truth, then we wouldn't be where we are. So we ended up where we are because a lot of us either surrendered, refused to say anything, or we defected and essentially went to the other side.
Caller wanted to know who you were funded by. What's your day job?
I work for the Blaze website, and that's all I'm funded by.
And you can check out Matt Walsh's work at mattwalshblog.com, themattwalshblog.com. On Twitter, it's at mattwalshblog. David's in Conway, Massachusetts, independent. David, good morning.
Good morning. Hello, Matt. I would have to say that religion and religious beliefs are a highly personal thing, and that we all practice them in different ways. I would also say that I respect your right to believe and practice your religion the way that you wish to do so. Where I have to come up and say, hold on, is when you try to take your religious beliefs and make me follow them. And that is a big issue. Because I'm not telling you how to worship. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm not proposing laws that make you do anything. And yet, I have lived in a country which has laws based on certain religions that I have to follow, even though I don't belong to that religion. How would you respond to that, sir?
Well, I don't think I'm advocating that you should have to follow any particular set of religious laws. I'm not saying that there should be a law that you have to go to church on Sunday. I'm not saying there should be a law that you have to give up meat on Fridays in Lent. That's not what I'm talking about. That would be a religious law. What I'm talking about are laws that are consistent with natural law. That is the ingrained law that's common to all humanity. And those are things like we all recognize that it's you can't kill people, you can't rape, those kinds of things. And that we all have a natural human dignity. So I'm talking about laws that respect our natural human dignity. Now, if we don't have a natural human dignity, by the way, then why are we having any of these discussions? Then we don't have rights at all. Rights are meaningless. Everything's meaningless, and let's all just be barbarians. But if we do have a natural human dignity, then we do have to get to the question of where does that come from? And if it comes from government, then it's just a construct. It's just artificial. It doesn't mean anything. But our founding fathers believed that our natural human dignity came from God. And that's why they wrote it right there in the Declaration of Independence. And there's no other real conclusion you can come to. So our country is not founded specifically on Christian laws where you have to follow kind of Christian, very specific theological edicts that you find in the New Testament with regards to things like church and that sort of thing. It's not founded on that, but it is founded on the notion that we have natural rights endowed by God. And you can't take that out of it, because once you take God out of it, then the rights go away, and then we're back, to a situation where where none of us have a foundation to claim any rights whatsoever. So that's all I'm discussing, and I think that probably the caller would agree that there should be laws against, burglary and theft and those kinds of things. Why there should be laws against it is because we have a natural human dignity that should be respected. All I'm talking about is extending that principle back to the unborn when it comes particularly to the abortion conversation.
Judith has been waiting in San Jose, California, a Democrat. Judith, good morning.
Yes, I have a couple of points I'd like to make. The first one is that it seems that the Christians of today, the evangelicals, want to glorify the fertilized egg, but once it's born, they want to help it out. In all the policies of the conservative agenda, they want to take away the medical care and et cetera. So that's going to make death, that's going to be death to babies and Americans. Also, if they don't want abortions, well, then how come they don't want to supply birth control to the poor of our a nation, and they block that by these government laws that the conservatives make. And number three is that the ultra conservatives and evangelicals seem to have gone along with Trump and the Republicans, and they've gone around the world overthrowing governments forever. And ever since the Bush and Cheney went into Iraq, it's been a disaster in the Middle East, and they're for that. So,
Judith, a lot of topics there, and about a minute or two left with Matt Walsh.
I think what you have there is a succession of straw men and deflections that mischaracterize my argument and also are not really related to it. So let's start with the first one. The first one is that Republicans don't care about babies once they're born. That's just there's just not true. That's I don't know what Republicans you're talking to that are saying we don't care about babies once they're born. But the real question is, aside from government policies, because we can have disagreements about what's the most efficient way to take care of the poor, what's the government's proper role in all that. But if you actually care about the poor, then what you're going to do is you're going to go yourself to help them. You're going to donate to charity. You're going to help the poor in an active way. And I think a great, vast number of pro-lifers and conservatives do that. I do, and every pro-lifer and conservative I know does. So that's just not true. The second one was, well, if we don't want abortions, then we have to pay for birth control. Again, that's what we call a false choice. Why do we have to choose between those two? Either give me free birth control or I'll kill my child? Why do I have to choose between those? Who decided that those have to be the choices? And the third one was really kind of amazing to me, that Trump and the Republicans are going around the world overthrowing people. I agree the Republicans have done that. Trump hasn't done that yet. I mean, give him a chance. But we just got through 8 years of Barack Obama traipsing around the Middle East, doing regime changes, unseating these dictators, creating a power vacuum, creating a void which was then filled largely by ISIS. So Barack Obama created, in a large part, him and Hillary Clinton created this situation in Syria, and yet we're just going to skip over that and pretend the last 8 years didn't happen, and let's just jump right to blaming Trump for everything. I just find that incredible and completely removed from the facts.
Matt Walsh is the author of the new book, The Unholy Trinity, Blocking the Left's Assault on Life, Marriage, and Gender. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it.